Zelensky heads to Davos to be part of the WEF, the World Economic Forum 2024 Rebuilding Trust Summit that they're having in Davos as they all fly in on their private jets and talk about climate change and getting those little peons, that's you, to reduce your carbon footprint as they all fly in on private jets and how they want to return morality and ethics to society as they are hiring hookers for 700 to 1,500 bucks a night. The reports coming out of Davos are wild. I mean, it's just like the biggest, showcasing of hypocrisy. And that's why people are so against it. And Klaus Schwab gets up there and says, oh, it's the libertarians causing us problems. Libertarians, oh no, they're against us. They want freedom. How dare they want freedom against government intrusion into their private lives? That's what Klaus Schwab has to say. Well, Zelensky was one who took part in the World Economic Forum. He's there now, and he's been chatting with various world leaders. He also spoke. While he's been speaking, now Klaus Schwab got up on stage and introduced Zelensky and said that there is no doubt that Ukraine is on the path to European integration, is what Klaus Schwab said when he introduced Zelensky at the meeting. And Zelensky had a couple of, watching his whole 30-minute speech, or it was like I think like 15-minute speech that he kind of did a question and answer after that. And watching it, I have to say, it's kind of hard to understand Zelensky and what his point is. He's obviously, English is not his primary language. The speech has been translated. I don't know if it's coming across exactly the way he intends for it to. And I'm sure he doesn't know either because English is not his native tongue. So how does he really know that it's not really coming across quite right? But there were a few things he said that stood out that I want to show you. One of the things he said was he was basically criticizing Europe, the West, and pointing at them and saying, how many of you could say that you could send soldiers to foreign countries for defense? It was unclear if he's saying, and I'll let you watch it and you decide. It's a little unclear if he's saying you need to start sending us people to fight in this war, or if he was saying, look at us, we're defending you because you wimpy Europeans, you wimpy Westerners are unwilling to actually provide troops for a battle. Watch this.
If anyone thinks this is only about us, this is only about Ukraine, they are fundamentally mistaken. Possible directions and even timeline of a new Russian aggression beyond Ukraine become more and more obvious. Let me ask very honestly, which European nation today can provide a combat-ready army on par with ours, holding back Russia? And how many men and women are your nation ready to send to defend another state, another nation?
Okay, so he's got kind of a good point. He's asking, how many of you have a combat ready, are you combat ready? So here we are fighting against Russia, and you wimpy Europeans are over there. Many of you are just being defended by the United States. The UK, has a military, but it's mostly naval. France has a pretty significant military. So, the Germans, we demilitarize them, so they don't really have one. It's just NATO. NATO is the combined force over there. And he's right. NATO has not given him any troops at all. And really, this whole entire speech from Zelensky was interesting because, he's not saying, let's continue to fight. Let's continue to go forward with this. A lot of it, he was saying, it's now time for peace. It's now time to rebuild. We need you to help us rebuild. We need money for rebuilding, not necessarily money for weapons. He kind of criticizes the Europeans and says, you told us not to strike back. You were afraid that this was going to widen the war, increase escalations, escalate tensions and widen the war. And so we didn't, but that was a mistake. I mean, he basically criticizes the West and says, I did everything you told me to do, and look at where I'm at. It's kind of the gist of what Zelensky had to say. And he has every right, I think, to be pretty perturbed that the West basically played him like a puppet. They were pulling his strings. I always use the wrong analogies. My dad's always like, you're combining them. And so I think it's like played him like a fiddle or like pulled the strings like a puppet, right? Either one, same thing. You get the idea. That's what they did to Zelensky. That's what the U.S., that's what NATO, that's what the UK, that's what the West did to Zelensky. They've been dangling, even before Zelensky, they've been dangling this idea of European inclusion to Ukraine, into the European Union for years and years and years. Oh, sure. We'll integrate you into the EU. Oh, sure, 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 sure. We'll bring you into NATO. Anyway, so about those corrupt business money laundering deals we're trying to do. Can we keep doing those? Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, in the future, yeah, we'll let you in the EU. Don't worry, don't worry. Anyway, about that money. That seems to be what has gone on, at least from our vantage point. That's what it looks like. Zelensky he did say that he wants the West to help him rebuild now. So this was kind of a difference. There were a lot of speakers talking about Ukraine at the WEF this last day who did talk about upping aid to Ukraine or criticizing the fact that the U.S. and some of Europe have not put forward the money to Ukraine, any further money to Ukraine. So there was a lot of criticism by others. But Zelensky took kind of a different tone to this meeting, again, pointing the finger, kind of saying, done what you guys have said and look at where I'm at. And now he's saying, so we're going to have to rebuild. And I guess that means you and your money now needs to help us rebuild. Watch this.
The war will end with a just and stable peace. And I want you to be the part of this peace, starting from right now, to bring the peace closer. And we need you in Ukraine to build, to reconstruct, to restore our lives. Each of you can be even more successful with Ukraine. And these days, right here in such beautiful country, in Switzerland, we have made a key political contribution to the possibility of ending the war. There was the most representative meeting of national security advisors regarding the implementation of the peace formula. More than 80 countries and international institutions were represented. Yesterday, I had very productive negotiation with the president of Switzerland and discussing the possibility of holding a summit at the leaders level in Switzerland. The first summit, the Global Peace Summit. Today, our teams have already begun work on organization such a summit, not the World War III, but the Global Peace Summit. And I invite every leader and country that respects peace and international law to join us.
Okay, so he also met with Antony Blinken, did have a sit-down meeting with him. Let's watch what they had to say.
Thanks so much. Well, I'm not sure who's hosting. It's so good to see you, all of our colleagues, and I just want to start by conveying President Biden's strong, enduring support for Ukraine. This at a time when you continue to face an almost daily onslaught from Russia, attacking infrastructure, attacking civilians, and we see that every day, but we also see the incredible courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people, the courage and resilience of your security forces. We're determined to sustain our support for Ukraine, and we're working very closely with Congress in order to do that.
Yeah, I tell you what, right now, I think that Zelensky is probably going to turn into enemy number one to the West. That would be my guess. I mean, how could he not? How could he not turn into enemy number one? Not that the U.S. or the West would demonize Zelensky, but it would be the other way around. I mean, here's a guy that was told, this is what you've got to do. We've got your back no matter what. We're in it to end. We're in it to win it. We're going to push Russia back. Don't you worry. Don't you worry. And so Zelensky goes forward, destroying his country, sacrificing many of his civilians. An entire generation of young men have been just pretty much dilapidated in the country. And all he's getting is lip service of like, oh yeah, one day, again, the same old bullcrap he's been hearing for years, which is, oh yeah, one day we'll integrate you into the EU. One day we'll put you into NATO, as they swear in Sweden and Finland right away. I mean, what a slap in the face. And then now he's asking for money to rebuild. He's like, okay, so now he's calling for a peace summit. He's been wanting, while he's there, he says he wants a peace summit of some sort. He wants to, he's wanting to end this thing. Clearly he realizes, okay, they're not going to give us any more military support. They're not going to send boots on the ground. I mean, if you're in his position and you're thinking, well, they say they're in it to the end. They're really staunch on this. They're giving me a lot of money and weapons right now. They'll probably eventually send troops. That's what you would kind of think if you were in his position. But of course, you and I knew better. We knew that that was never going to happen. And it didn't happen. We were not going to send troops. And of course, the American people grew weary of continuing to send money to Ukraine in a war that they clearly are going to lose. We don't want another never-ending war like in Afghanistan where it just siphons off American resources. We just don't want that. So you and I knew, but Zelensky didn't know, and the Ukrainian people didn't know. And now they're starting to get that as a real, like, being doused with ice water. And then he's going to the World Economic Forum and he's begging for money. And guess what? That's not going to result in anything good, because it's not like the U.S. is just going to give him, or the West is going to give him money to rebuild out of the goodness of our hearts. We're not going to give it away. No, it's going to be big businesses going in there, owning everything and siphoning off the resources from the Ukrainian people, ensuring that all of the money just goes to wealthy American oligarchs, essentially, and European oligarchs. That's where the money's going to go. So they traded. At the end of the day, what they're going to realize is they traded one oligarchy for another oligarchy. They went from Russian oligarchs who were in Ukraine and influencing their political system to American and Western oligarchs who are going to go into Ukraine and rebuild and say, but this is mine, not really yours. We're the ones making all the money off of it. Oh, boo-hoo for you. And oh, by the way, we're going to meddle in your political system. And so it's just a trade-off. The only difference is he doesn't really speak English that well, but he speaks Russian. So would you rather have, if you're Ukrainian, who many of them are Russian speakers, Zelensky, his first language, his native language is Russian. Ukrainian is his second tongue. English, clearly not that great. So at least he would have been able to speak to the people who are and it's a neighbor, a border neighbor. You share a border, you share a culture, you're cousins, you share language, you share people. I mean, if you're going to be under the influence of an oligarch, that's an oligarchy or a corrupt government that's going to come in and siphon your resources and run the show, you would think that you'd want to at least understand their language. That would just go back to basics. So I just think that in the end, the United States is, I mean, Zelensky looks weary. He's pointing the finger a lot in these kind of like backhanded jabs. And I do think that he's ultimately, we're creating enemy number one. This is how they turn. This is how it happens. They say, I thought you were my friend, and it turns out you weren't. So I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years, Ukraine cuddles back up with Russia and just really starts to hate the United States. I wouldn't be surprised by that.